Be'ezrat Hashem, continuing with part 2 of the Dvar Torah. So we were speaking about Moshe Rabbeinu finally acquiescing to Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven's request. They wanted a portion of land on the east of the Jordan. They didn't want to enter Eretz Yisrael proper. And then all of a sudden, after Moshe Rabbeinu says, okay, fine, you know what, you Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, you guys can stay on this side of the Jordan. You can stay on the east side. But he adds, you guys and Chatzi Shevet Menashe, and half of the tribe of Menashe, you guys can all stay in the east of the Jordan. So we're discussing what is this all about, that Menashe joins them. What does this symbolize? So B'ezrat Hashem, this year, in part 2 right now, I wanted to go with a new approach. This is based on Rav Moshe Wolfson Alav Shalom in his Sefer Binat Itecha, really on last week's parasha, but he says some big ideas, which B'ezrat Hashem I want to try to flesh out, because it's going to give us deeper insight to who is Menashe, what is he all about, and what is his symbol, La'atid Labo. Okay, so says Rav Moshe Wolfson, we don't really find in the Pesukim, nor do we find in the early Divrei Chazal, any ta'ana against Menashe for taking land on both sides. Now we mentioned that we saw in the worst case with the Midrash that said it might be a punishment, a tikkun, for Menashe being involved in the whole Gavia, the whole silver cup story between Yosef and his brothers when he hid it inside Binyamin's knapsack. So there might have been a punishment. That's from a Midrash. But for the most part, any of the more negative ta'anot, it's coming from the later Mefarshim, Rishonim, Achronim. But if you go back to the earlier Pesukim, you go back to the earlier Divrei Chazal, we don't really find there's a real argument against Menashe for being on the east of the Jordan. But when it comes to Bnei Gad, Bnei Reuven, we see Moshe Rabbeinu himself giving the crazy musar against them, and then we see that it wasn't seen in the right light. Okay, actually the truth is I found the exact opposite. There seems to be a remez in the Pesukim that Menashe having land on both sides of the Jordan, that's actually part of Yaakov's beracha that he gives at the end of his life, Parashat Vayechid, to Yosef. At the very end, he blesses Yosef. It seems to be the part of his beracha to Yosef was actually hinting to this idea that Menashe would have territory, would have nachala on both sides of the Yarden. Because if you look a little closer at his beracha to Yosef, actually it seems to be a beracha to Yosef's daughters. It seems to be there's a hint over here. Okay, so let's look at one interpretation of Chazal. This is based on a Midrash Tanchuma. This is on Parshat Pinchas, Siman Tet. Now, the words in the Pasuk are very complicated, and I've noticed that Mefarshim translate it in many different ways, and that's because it's cryptic. So it says as follows, says the Midrash, Ve'af Yaakov Avinu ra'a shenotlot mikan o mikan. And even Yaakov Avinu saw that that these daughters would inherit both on this side and on that side. Now, the Midrash itself is dealing with the Benot Slovchad, last week's parasha, and how they were able to cross the Jordan. Unlike Moshe Rabbeinu, who's going to be stuck, the Yarden is going to kind of be like a choma, it's going to be a wall blocking Moshe Rabbeinu to enter Eretz Yisrael. But the Benot Slovchad, these Benot Menashe, they had the ability to not only inherit land on the east of the Jordan, they could even go and get land in the main Eretz Yisrael. They had that Zechut. So meaning from the Midrash over here, it seems the Chidush is that Menashe could get into the land of Eretz Yisrael and not just be stuck on the east of the Jordan. Okay, let's go to the actual Midrash. Says the Midrash. Here's the pasuk. The pasuk in Vayechi. Banot tza'ada alei shur. When Yaakov blesses Yosef, he says, "Banot," sounds like daughters. Your daughters, meaning these holy princesses of the future. Tza'ada, they're going to stride forth alei shur, across the boundaries. Meaning these daughters are going to be able to cross over the boundaries, or actually, as the Midrash is going to learn shur to be a choma, they're able to cross the wall. So it explains the Midrash. Zeh hayarden shena'asa kechoma. This is the Yarden that became like a wall. Shelo yikanes la'aretz. So you can't enter. It's blocking. It's going to block Moshe Rabbeinu, and it seems like it's also going to block part of the Bnei Yosef. Va'amar lo Yaakov liYosef, benotecha notelot kan vekan. Your daughters, they're going to be able to inherit on both sides. They're going to get from the east of the Jordan. They're also going to get on the west of the Jordan. They're going to make it into Eretz Yisrael proper. Now, I had always understood on Chazal, also based on Pesukim and Yehoshua, that the Benot Slovchad, they dafka wanted land in Eretz Yisrael proper. You know, it's the other cousins from Menashe, maybe even their female cousins. They're the ones that got on the east side, but they wanted Eretz Yisrael proper. That's why they were fighting so much in last week's parasha. We don't want to be on the east of the Jordan. We want to be in there. But it didn't seem anywhere. This whole concept of having Menashe on the east of the Jordan, this is a much later development, only in our parasha. So the Benot, everybody thought they were going to be in Eretz Yisrael proper, according to simple simple pshat. And now Benot Tzlofchad in last week's parasha say we also want to be there. Our father also deserves lands. Our Tzlofchad line also wants to have land in Eretz Yisrael. But there was never this discussion of having land on the east of the Jordan also. And even though this midrash is speaking about the Benot Tzlofchad and how they have a Zechut to enter Eretz Yisrael, and it's predicated on the idea that Yosef his daughters are going to have land on both sides of the Jordan, I don't think it actually applies to Tzlofchad's daughters themselves. Rather, when he's talking about your daughters will have on both sides, Lanut Dati, what it's referring to is that they're going to have land on the right side and on the left side, meaning your kids are going to have land on both sides. But Tzlofchad themselves, those daughters, they wanted Eretz Yisrael proper. And then but we should realize that there will be Menashe people on both sides, so there is a bit of this prophecy that Menashe will be on both sides already from the beracha of Yaakov to Yosef. And now this midrash is coming to speak about the Benot Tzlofchad directly, that even though they're only daughters, there's no sons to inherit, they're still going to have this koach to break through that choma, to break through that wall of the Jordan and cross over. I was thinking, we always think about, the other river. We have the Yam Suf, where the Jewish people cross over and they were able to break through and split the sea. So one of the main approaches in Chazal, what was the Zechut to break through the Yam Suf? It was Arono Shel Yosef, the Atzmot Yosef. It's Yosef himself that's able, his kochot, that can split the Yam Suf. And now we have his granddaughters. They also seem to have this koach to also break through that spiritual wall of the Yarden to make it in as well, to inherit for their father, Tzlofchad. Okay. And I saw in Sefer Biyad Neviecha, similar idea brought down that it seems that the Benot Tzlofchad loved Eretz Yisrael so much that they didn't take land in the east of the Jordan. But then I saw in Sefer Har Tzion that he says, no, take the Midrash as is. Benot Tzlofchad, meaning the Midrash starts with Benot Tzlofchad, then it speaks about the daughters of Yosef, meaning the Benot Tzlofchad, not other daughters too. They indeed had nachala on both sides. So here's his chidush. He says that their inheritance in Israel proper, that they fought so much for in last week's parasha, that was Tzlofchad, their father's official portion, meaning their father died without sons. That portion was going to be totally lost. So his portion itself, that's a portion in Eretz Yisrael. But then he says that apparently they inherited another piece as well, because if you go back to earlier generations, Tzlofchad's father, grandfather, it's not so clear exactly, but he says that apparently that Tzlofchad himself had inherited land from his father, from his grandfather, and that land was the land on the east of the Jordan. It relates more specifically to the Gilad line in Menashe, and actually just to understand correctly, Gilad, Machir, Hefer, who is the father, who's the son, who's the grandson, much bigger discussion. I think we touched upon it a little bit a couple of years ago, but if you look at Divrei Yamim, look at our Psukim, nothing is clear at all. Who is whose father and who's grandfather? It's not as simple as it seems like in last week's parasha, but it seems to be that part of the Gilad territory fell to Tzlofchad, says the Sefer Har Tzion, and that was in the east of the Jordan, because we find that in the end of our second parsha this week, in Parashat Masei, we have the Bnei Gilad. They're the ones that are so worried that Tzlofchad, they're going to lose their nachala. If the Bnot Tzlofchad, they marry out, if they'd marry into a different tribe, then they would lose part of their territory. Ultimately, Baruch Hashem, Bnot Tzlofchad, in this situation, they marry within the Menashe family. All is good. It stays within the same tribe, so they get land in Israel, but then it stays with Menashe after they die, because their husbands are from Menashe as well. But says the Sefer Har Tzion, the inheritance that these Bnei Gilad are fighting about is the inheritance of the area called Eretz Gilad, which is this part that we're reading in our Parshiot that they were conquering on the east of the Jordan, which is called Eretz Gilad. So he says it's not even talking about the fight itself, isn't even over Eretz Yisrael proper. It's a fight over the land on the east of the Jordan, meaning the extra part. Benot Tzlofchad, they wanted Eretz Yisrael proper, and they got it through their father's direct line. But the extra inheritance would have come about on the east of the Jordan. Massive chidush, very interesting. It clearly places, it takes a couple of assumptions that the east of the Jordan was part of the heavenly Goral to begin with, part of the Nachala, has the Kedusha of Nachala. So it actually assumes a certain bunch of givens in a lot of Machlokot along the way. And therefore I'd argue that you can stop it along the way and say, no, they're really fighting over Eretz Yisrael proper too, because these Bnei Gilad are not talking about the Gilad on the east side, but nevertheless, his approach is awesome, and definitely tzarich more iyun on it, because I'm sure there's a lot more deeper ideas if we take it to even further levels. Okay, but back to our story. So if we go to the bracha of Yaakov, so he said, Banot tza'ada alei shur. These daughters, these holy princesses, these bat melechs, they are striving over, they're crossing over the boundaries, they're able to break through the choma, they can break through the shur, they break through the wall. Now, in this case, breaking through the wall is you break through to enter Eretz Yisrael. Now, if we take this angle of breaking through to get in, so now I want to return to Rav Moshe Wolfson's Dvar Torah. So he learns a reverse idea than we normally learn when we assume about breaking walls. Normally, we think about breaking walls in the negative. But now he's saying the breaking of the walls is positive. It's the ability to get to the other side. It's the ability to now maybe even expand Eretz Yisrael to the east of the Jordan. If we have regular Eretz Yisrael, but if we break through that wall, maybe now we can expand a little bit more to the east. Okay, what does that mean? Now, says Rav Wolfson, he says that the expansion of territory, crossing past the Jordan, going to the east, taking part of the east of the Jordan, and making that part of holy Eretz Yisrael, even if it's a slightly lower level of Kedusha, but calling that holy Eretz Yisrael, that is a siman, it's a symbol for Yomot HaMashiach. It's a symbol for messianic era. And he even goes more than that. He says, you want to know a proof that we're dealing with symbols for the future and not for right now? Because he writes the whole story is about women inheriting. And the inheritance, the nachala that follows to women because there was no brothers. That itself, he says, is a really big siman. Because women's inheritance doesn't last more than that actual generation of those women. Because she's guaranteeing her father's line just for them. But once she marries someone else, that land gets transferred to the husband's family. Her sons, which are going to be now from her husband's line, so meaning if she marries out to a different tribe, her sons now belong to the other tribe, and they would lose out. And that's why the Bnei Gilad were complaining, and that's why ultimately the Benot Tzofchad, Tzadkaniot, they married within the tribe. They married literally within the tribe of Menashe, so that way it would never leave the tribe. But even so, even when they married in the tribe of Menashe, it now jumps to that family that they marry into. But says Rav Moshe Wolfson, that's not a long-lasting nachala. So he says, Benot Tzolchad's deep desire, this love that the members of Menashe have for Eretz Yisrael, is a symbol for a future goal of a nachala that's achieved through breaking through the wall. Meaning they want Eretz Yisrael so much, Hashem broke the Choma of the Yarden, let them in to get that nachala in Eretz Yisrael, but it's not going to be permanent. Because at this point in the Torah, at this point in Jewish history, we're not a messianic era yet. We didn't get to that level, so their ability to gain inheritance in the land of Israel is temporary, just a symbol that in the future, this Koach of Menashe will be able to get bigger nachala. And now let's relate it back to our parasha and half the tribe of Menashe and their expansion into the east of the Jordan. But first off, let's talk about this time of year right now. Right now, when we think of breaking up the walls, we think of it as something very negative. We had the fast of Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, when the walls of Yerushalayim were broken down. And then if we go back even further in Jewish history, it was the day that those first luchot, those miraculous Torah-filled luchot were broken and those holy letters flew back up to the Shamayim. It's the Beit HaMetzarim right now, Yud Zayin B'Tammuz until Tisha B'Av. We're in a time of mourning because the breaking of the walls is a negative idea. But says Rav Wolfson, he shows from other chazals that sometimes though breaking through the walls of Yerushalayim, it could be a Zechut. And just as Benot Yosef broke through the Choma to get into Eretz Yisrael, so too in the future there's going to be another breaking of the walls for Eretz Yisrael to expand out. So this says the Yalkut Shimoni, this is the Midrash, on Yeshayahu Remes Taf Kuf Gimel. It says as follows, Amar Rabbi Levi, says Rabbi Levi, Atida Yerushalayim liot ke'Eretz Yisrael. In the future, Yerushalayim is going to expand out to be like as large as Eretz Yisrael. The Eretz Yisrael, kechol alam kulo. And Eretz Yisrael is going to expand out to the whole world. In the Messianic era, Latid Lavo, Yerushalayim will expand out to Eretz Yisrael. We're going to see in a second another midrash even further a little bit. And Eretz Yisrael is going to expand out to the entire world. Says the midrash, similarly, Shira Shirim Rabbah, Perek Zayin. In my editions, it's Siman Yud. Now, in this mashal, there's many ways to look who's the male, who's the female. In this approach in the Midrash, the rabbi at this moment says that the mashal, the female, is Yerushalayim. So it says as follows. If we go to the praise, if we look at this beautiful praise of the Chatan to the Kala, Apech kemigdal halevanon. He says, your nose is like the Lebanon tower. Tzofe penei Damasek. That's looking towards Damascus, okay? Now, I'm not going to make any jokes about noses over here, but what is these last three words? That basically, there's this looking towards, Tzofe penei Damasek, looking towards Damascus, looking towards Syria. What is that talking about? Says the Midrash. Tzofe penei Damasek, Amar Rabbi Yohanan, Atida Yerushalayim shtehe magaat ad sha'arei Damasek. Says Rabbi Yohanan, in the future, this enlarged Yerushalayim is going to expand all the way to the Sha'arei Damascus. It's going to make it all the way to that border of Syria, up into the gates of Damascus. Now, if we continue in the Midrash then goes on to expand upon this idea from different angles about an enlarged future Yerushalayim, and it actually includes a pasuk from Yeshayahu that we sing every Friday night. Rav Alkabetz added it to the Lachadodi. Yamin usmol tifrotzi. Right and left, you're going to expand, or you're going to break through. Tifrotzi is even stronger language. Yerushalayim is going to expand. Interesting. I was thinking, this language of Tifrotzi, breaking through, that the Benot Shlochad, they can break through the wall of the Yarden, the Yered Nun, they can make it all the way into Eretz Yisrael. If we understand the sin of Tzlofchad, according to Rabbi Akiva, who says that their father was sinned by breaking Shabbat, it's about breaking boundaries, but breaking boundaries in order to protect Shabbat, to reinforce those boundaries. And then if you look at the Ramami Pano, he's going to give you future Gilgulin that are going to take place in 2 future Gemarot, including the more famous one that Ben Ish Chai brings down as well, the Chasid in the Gemara, Shabbat Tav Kuf Nun, who didn't want to close up his pirza, his hole in the fence, and that becomes a tikkun. But this concept of breaking through, yamin small tifrotzi, to the frotzta gader, the frotzta homa. There's a certain koach of Menashe to break through. B'ezrat Hashem in a future year, maybe next year we'll speak about the Mekul Shesh in more detail. But the Midrash by us closes off. Rabbi Yossi, the Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar, says Rabbi Yossi in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, Adayin lo lamanu shevach Yerushalayim. He says, we still didn't learn the praise of Yerushalayim. We want to praise Yerushalayim more. Mehechan lamed shivcha. Where are we going to learn the real praises of Yerushalayim? Says the Midrash, says Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yirmiyah, mechomoteya. We're going to learn the praises of Yerushalayim. We're going to learn how to praise Yerushalayim from its walls. Shneimar, as the pasuk says in Zechariah, Vani eheye la ne'um Hashem chomat esh saviv. And I'm going to be, Hashem Kadosh Baruch Hu says, I promise I'm going to be with you like a fiery choma, like a fiery wall all around. Look at the name of, look at there, Vani eheye. We spoke about the Aleph, the Hey, the Yud, Hey. It's probably definitely a hint over there. But what does this mean? Hashem's going to be the walls in the future? What kind of praises? We praise Yerushalayim from the walls. So if you open up those Pesukim in Zechariah, it speaks of a future Yerushalayim. In the times of Mashiach, that the Jewish people are going to expand, and we're going to be such a good place. We're going to have so much more belongings and cattle, and we're going to extend far beyond the walls of Yerushalayim. In the Miknei Rav, we're going to have so much belongings and so much stuff, and so many people are going to want to live in Yerushalayim that the old Yerushalayim is going to run out of space. It's going to be too small. So what happens if it becomes too small? Then we're going to have to expand the boundaries. How do you expand the boundaries? So says Rav Moshe Wolfson explaining this, he says that walls take up space. We got to get rid of the walls. And now if you look at those psukim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, okay, you're not going to have walls, don't worry, I'll be your walls. I'll be your walls of fire. But we're going to have to expand out so everybody can fit. That's the messianic era. That's the future when all Yerushalayim are going to want to live and move freely in Yerushalayim. And I was thinking, today's Yerushalayim, how much further is the new Yerushalayim? Does it expand past the old city walls? Baruch Hashem, maybe we're beginning to see a little bit of those nevuot beginning to take place right now. Now, Lanut Dati, if we can take this idea further, so again, we think about this time period, Ben HaMetzarim, we have the breaking of the walls, we have the breaking of the walls of Yerushalayim, we think of it as the negative, but maybe, B'ezrat Hashem, there will also be in the future a bit of a tikkun, a flip is going to take place, and a hafochu, that ultimately the breaking of the walls is going to become a good thing, because Latit Lavo, it's all going to reverse, and we're going to have to break the future walls, because we're going to have to extend the Kedusha, we're going to have to be able to make more space for Am Yisrael, more space for wanting to be next to Yerushalayim. Now, Rav Wolfson, as well as many other mystical commentators, they learned this concept of expansion, this expanding of the land of Eretz Yisrael, this expansion of Makom, also corresponds to other zones. There's expansion of Makom. There's also expansion of time, of Zman. There's expansion of Torah, expansion of the Jewish people. And it's really actually a lot of the deeper layers in Rav Shlomo Al-Kabetz's Lechadodi also can be read on the same different layers. We're speaking about Yamin Usmol Tifrotzi. It's corresponding to all these angles. Because as in the Midrashim, the Mekubalim speak of the land of Eretz Yisrael in the times of the Mashiach. It's going to expand in all directions. But so too is Zman. We have, while Yerushalayim is the Makom, Shabbat is the Zman. So the day of Shabbat is going to expand Yamin Usmol Tifrotzi to an Olam Shekulo Shabbat. And so too with the Midah of Malchut, that ultimately the kingship of HaKadosh Baruch Hu will expand over the whole world, so the whole world will accept Hashem in the times of Mashiach. V'ayah Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz, bayom hahu yeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad. B'ezrat Hashem in the future, Hashem will be melech on everywhere. This is also the idea of the Levana, the moon that's going to keep expanding to get to its complete full light. And so too, I hesitantly want to add Lanutati, the breaking of the luchot, while we mourn the shattering of the first luchot. It was the Shvirat luchot. But as we spoke a few weeks ago, that once the original luchot were broken, now the Torah is no longer in one spot. So that's a negative. But on the other hand, today we have to go to the Beit Midrash and to learn it out, to toil, to unveil those secrets. And in a certain sense, those letters that flew back up to the Shamayim, now when we learn Torah, we learn Be'iyun, we really try to get out those chidushim, what we're doing is we're expanding the Torah down below as well. So now we're actively, it's true, in the beginning Hashem gave it all to us as a matana, as a present, it was all there. But now we see that we have to work for it. And that itself, there's a certain ma'alah to it. You know, with the baby in the womb, when the baby's in the womb, the angel's teaching the baby the whole Torah, and then the baby forgets it when the baby comes out, because now the avodah of this world, that's why Hashem created a world, so to speak. In the first place, it's for us to toil and to work hard, like dil Torah v'ladira. So in a certain sense, the breaking of the luchot, we speak of these breaking of these walls, there's a certain zechut that comes about with the breaking of the luchot, and the fact that today, at least from our perspective, post-sin, we now have the opportunity to make the Torah much greater. Now, the concept of these expansions in Makom of Yerushalayim, expansions in time, Zman, Shabbat, Olam Shekulo Shabbat, says Rav Wolfson beautifully, this is the symbol, the Zechut of Menashe. The tribe of Menashe, they are all about the expansion. We have a halacha known as Tosefet Shabbat. We're supposed to add on to Shabbat, halacha la Masei. Already now, even before the times of Mashiach, each week we bring in Shabbat a little bit earlier. 18 minutes early candle lightings, 20 minutes earlier, 15 minutes, 45, depending what city you live in here in Israel. We bring it in a little bit earlier. Motzei Shabbat, we don't just wait for those small stars. We wait for the larger stars to come out. We want to extend our time. We want to extend Shabbat. We say in the Pasuk, La'asot et ha-Shabbat. What does it mean, la'asot, to make Shabbat? So I heard once a beautiful pshat, by adding that little time on Friday and that extension, Motzei Shabbat, if you add all of that up after a course of a full year of those of the 20 minutes before, the after, you put it all together, it gets to a full Shabbat, meaning every single year we make an extra Shabbat with the Tosefet Shabbat that we do. Now, as we spoke last week, every single person has a letter in the Torah. Every Jewish neshama corresponds to a letter. Says Rav Wolfson. He argues that the tribe of Levi, their section in the Torah, corresponds to the laws of Shabbat and Yom Tov. We know that Levi doesn't have physical land in Eretz Yisrael because the land also corresponds to the Torah portion. They don't have physical land in Eretz Yisrael. They don't have Nachala. Hashem is their Nachala. Why? He says because probably their Torah portion is a portion that has an Isur Melacha. Shabbat and Yom Tov, we don't do Melacha. There's no physical work. So if there's no physical work, you don't need physical Makom, and that's why their Makom is not officially a piece of a Nachala. He says rather, their place is going to be Yerushalayim, because Yerushalayim, that's considered to be a universal territory. It doesn't belong to any of the tribes. These are cities, these are walled cities, and it's a place where they can buy and own their land, but it's really a place for everybody, because Levi, language of Milaveh, Levi is supposed to guide everybody else, and he's the one that's supposed to he corresponds to the concept of Yerushalayim, which is a makom that's really for the whole Jewish people, and that's Levi's role. So he wants to say that Levi, beautiful chidush, Levi is the Torah of the Shabbat and the Yom Tov. But then he adds, now for our Dvar Torah, then he adds that Yosef was also deeply rooted in Shabbat, but from a different angle. He says, Chazal tell us that Yosef kept Shabbat even in Mitzrayim, even in Chutz La'aretz, in Chul, in Galut, even before a Jew was Chayav, we didn't get the Torah yet, and a Jew wasn't Chayav yet to keep Shabbat. We find, by according to many opinions, by the Avot and probably by the Bnei Yaakov, when they were in Mitzrayim, they didn't necessarily keep all the halachot. The Torah wasn't given yet on Mount Sinai, which then meant that maybe only in Eretz Yisrael they kept it, or they have all these different ways to understand how much did they keep, how much did they not keep. But the Midrash tells us that even in Chul, even in Chutz La'aretz, Yosef kept Shabbat. He was so deeply rooted in Shabbat. He was so deeply a little bit in this concept of bringing Kedusha to the whole. Even the language of Chul, Chutz La'aretz, it's an abbreviation. We call it Chul. Chul is like the weekday. We have Chol and Shabbat. So Yosef seems to bring this Kedusha into the whole. Says the Midrash, is Midrash b'Midbar Rabbah and Parashat Naso, Perek Yudaled, Siman Yudaled. Davar Acher, the Midrash now is quoting a pasuk in Eov, which says, Mi hikdimani v'ashalem. Who got there before me? Who preceded me? That now I can pay them back. That I can v'ashalem. I'll give them back for what they did. Says the Midrash, Medaber beYosef. This is talking about Yosef. Shehu hikdim v'shimar et haShabbat ad shelo nitana. He was makdim. He already kept Shabbat. He was shomer Shabbat Ad shelo nitena, even before it was given. Utvoach tevach ve'achen. The pasuk says that he sent his apprentice, go out there and slaughter the food, ve'achen, and prepare the food. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, erev Shabbat haita. Says Rabbi Yochanan, it was Friday, it was erev Shabbat. Ve'ein hachen ela leShabbat. And whenever we have this language of prepare, ve'achen, hachana, it's hachana for Shabbat. Ve'ein hachen ela leShabbat. Shenemar v'aya b'yom hashishi ve'echinu, as the pasuk tells us, by Shabbat b'yom hashishi ve'echinu, you got to prepare yourself for the Shabbat. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yosef, Ata shimarta ta Shabbat ad shelo nitena Torah. Yosef, you kept Shabbat even before the Torah was given. Hayecha, and that's the mi'ekdimeni in the pasuk. Hayecha shani meshalem leben bincha sheyeh makriv korbano b'Shabbat. I'm going to give you a special bracha that I'm going to pay it back to you. That your great grandson is going to bring his korban on Shabbat. Mashe'en yachid makriv, even though normally a yachid can't bring a korban on Shabbat. Va'alei lekabel korban beratzon. Your grandson is going to bring a korban yachid on Shabbat, and I'm going to accept it beratzon. I'm going to happily accept his korban heavy, and that's the meaning of the pasuk. Mi aktimani v'shalem. And says, how do we know this is true? What are we talking about? That his son brought a korban on Shabbat, or his grandson? So this midrash is going on Parashat Naso. Parashat Naso is the 12 days of the inauguration of the Mishkan in the desert, and every single day a korban was brought, and including the seventh day, there was no breakage. We spoke about this past year a little bit more in detail, but the Bnei Ephraim was on day number 7, which turned out to also be Shabbat, and they brought it on Shabbat, even though normally a korban yachid, because these individual korbanot that were brought were considered to be korban yachids, even though that itself could be a little bit of machloka because the yachud that took place over here. But on the simple level, it's a korban yachid. You can't bring a korban yachid on Shabbat, but Ephraim was allowed to. Hashem accepted it beratzon as a zechut for Yosef loving Shabbat. Yosef was Yosef Mokir Shabbat. It's a story in the Gemara in Shabbat, Kuf Yudet Amud Aleph, about Yosef Mokir Shabbat, about this Yosef that just loved Shabbat, prepared for Shabbat, spend bucks to get good fish for Shabbat every single week. And the whole story over there, but the gemstone, Ayin Sham, Dag Gematria 7, Gematria Shabbat. There was this guy in the Gemara called Yosef Mokir Shabbat. Our Yosef Tzaddik was Mokir Shabbat. He too did the Hachanot. He too showed the love of Shabbat. I was actually thinking there has to be a much deeper connection from the fact that our Yosef Tzaddik is Mr. Shabbat, and so too is Yosef Mokir Shabbat in the Gemara. So Baruch Shekivanti, I found the Shvilei Pinchas. He quotes a couple of sources that future Yosef, that lover of Shabbat, had to have been a nitzotz, a spark of our Yosef Tzaddik, who already earlier in the parasha, in our parashiyot, loved Shabbat. So our Yosef, and now it makes a lot of sense. If Shabbat is the place in Zman, and Yerushalayim is the place in Makom, so Yosef is the great lover of the Makom of Yerushalayim, of Eretz Yisrael. He's also the great lover of Shabbat. So our Yosef Tzaddik, he keeps Shabbat even in Chul, and this leads to the head of the tribe of Ephraim, the times of Parashat Naso, the Chanukat HaMizbeach. He brings his Korban Yachid. Now, in the past, we spoke about, touched a little bit upon the idea that this is kind of a weird paradox, that like by keeping Shabbat in Chutz La'aretz, your grandson gets to break Shabbat now. Like, it's a funny thing. Like, what do you mean? Because you kept Shabbat, he now gets to break Shabbat? It's beratzon. Kind of strange, but it might give us a little bit of an understanding of if we say that the other Ben Yosef, the other Ben Menashe, if we say that Tzlofchad's sin, according to Rabbi Akiva, was that he was the Mekoshesh, that he broke Shabbat L'Shem Shamayim, so then maybe it makes a little bit sense that it seems to be that the grandkids of Yosef seem to think they could break the halacha a little bit when it comes to Shabbat. They have a certain zechut, because they're such lovers of Shabbat. And we know that Tzlofchad did it L'Shem Shamayim, he wanted to be Zakeh Rabim. So when you have such love of Shabbat, there might be some opening to do more. In the case of the Mekoshesh, at least in the Beitim Shel Mata, he had to be killed. But it seems to be this interesting precedent that we have the head of Ephraim, a Ben Yosef, who breaks Shabbat as a korban yachid, and Hashem takes it. Okay. But if you notice, not only is our midrash discussing Yosef keeping Shabbat, but it's also speaking about the hachanot, the preparation, as the pasuk says, utvoach tevach ve'achen. Yosef tells his apprentice, go slaughter the animal and then prepare it. Ve'achen. Rabbi Yochanan, erev Shabbat hayta ve'ein achen ela Shabbat. Rabbi Yochanan says hachen means erev Shabbat, preparations. So this is the preparations lichovod Shabbat. Part of the preparations is includes Tosefet Shabbat, adding on to the Shabbat. Says Rabbeinu Bechaye, in that pasuk, who is Yosef sending? Who was his apprentice? Who was his number 2 man? Who was his right-hand guy to go do his work for him? Who prepared the meat? Who did it all lichvot Shabbat? Who was it? Says the Rebbeinu Bechaya on the spot, Menashe. It was Menashe. Yosef's Bechor Menashe, he was the right-hand man. He's behind the scenes, according to Chazal, in all the stories in Mitzrayim. Says Rav Moshe Wolfson beautifully, Yosef kept Shabbat and he prepared for Shabbat. Ephraim bringing his Korban on Shabbat, this corresponds to Yosef keeping the actual Shabbat in Mitzrayim. But Menashe, who brought his Korban the next day, he brought it on the day number 8. He corresponds to the Tosefet Shabbat. Because day number 8, we have Tosefet Shabbat before Shabbat, and we have Tosefet Shabbat once the 7th day is over. We try to extend it into the 8th day. We bring in Shabbat early when we light our candles. Actually, since October 7th in my shul, the Rav of my shul, he asked everybody, can we please bring in even 5 minutes, even earlier than the official times here in Beit Shemesh? Because it's a Zechut for Am Yisrael to add more Shabbat into the world. Menashe corresponds to the extending of Shabbat, the expanding of Shabbat, both on Erev Shabbat as he prepared the feast for the brothers in the Torah, as well as after Shabbat as we're going to push off Havdalah. We're not going to do those smaller stars. We're going to wait for the stars are larger. We spoke last week that Menashe is Otiyot Mishnah. Mishnah corresponds to the 6 Sedarim, the 6 days of the week where we have to work, prepare ourselves, that oral Torah that we have to study and work really hard in, and we have to do our part down below. Yosef, Mashiach ben Yosef, he prepares the world for the real Malchut of Mashiach ben David. But it's about the preparation work. Menashe, according to Chazal, is always the primary shamash in all of the royal work. And that's why Rebbeinu Bechaya is so quick to say, oh, who was the guy slaughtering the stuff? It's Menashe. He's the one bringing them the meat. He's the one getting ready for Seudat Shabbat. Actually, I saw it in a footnote in the Oz V'Adar on that Rebbeinu Bechaya. So he writes that part of the slaughter may have been for Menashe to remove the Gida Nashe, because we know kashrut might not have been commanded yet to the Jewish people, but it sounds like there already was a chiyuv to remove that sciatic nerve, to remove the Gida Nashe already on the Bnei Yaakov after the fight with the angel story of Yaakov in the middle of the night. So it says from that point on, there's a new halacha. So it kind of sounds like, at least for the Gida Nashe, at the point in history when Yosef is with the brothers, at that point it kind of sounds like that level of kashrut they did keep. Therefore, he sends Menashe to go find the Gid Hanashe. Note the similarity in the names, and also note the connection to our time period right now, because that tasteless Gida Nashe, it actually corresponds symbolically to Tisha B'Av. And anybody interested more on that PM, maybe we actually spoke about it 2 years ago on Tisha B'Av, all about the Gida Nashe Tisha B'Av connection. So now, Menashe, we saw in the other midrash we mentioned earlier, he's the person who was being sent to manage the whole Gaviyah campaign. When Yosef wanted to fool the brothers and plant that silver goblet, that silver cup in Binyamin's knapsack. So there, it's Menashe is the one that does it, because as the midrash says, because when the brothers were caught, with the goblet, Binyamin's knapsack, they ripped their clothing. So said the midrash, because they ripped their clothing, that pain that they had led to the future ripping of Menashe's territory. So that was in a more negative lens. But now maybe we can say it. Maybe we can look at this ripping in a little bit more of a positive lens. I remember learning once about Kiriyah for a mourner. A mourner rips his clothing when a loved one dies. Why is he doing that? So I heard once it's a statement that the beged, the clothing represents the physical representation of the goof. After Adam and Chava sinned with Etz Hadat, so they need to hide their nakedness because of the sin. They became such goof, such olam hazeh, such physical, such ta'ava. They needed to hide it. So the beged, language of bigud, of livgod, of rebelling, the clothing is that way down to cover up the nakedness. So it's a symbol of the nakedness. So therefore, if now this person has died, the neshama has come out, it's ascended up to the olam haba. So the physical ripping of the physical clothing, ripping of the olam hazeh, as a statement that now the neshama that's beneath is now rising and going up to olam haba. Now, laniut dati, I was thinking this actually is visually very similar to Luchot being broken by Moshe as well. When Moshe breaks the Luchot and then those letters fly up back into the heavens, the Torah, so to speak, being freed from the sin of the Egel HaZahav taking place down below. So we do have this concept that maybe the breakage is to release something, to expand something out, some Torah, some Kedusha, and Neshama coming out. So now, as we've been saying, Menashe was more involved in the day-to-day. He was doing the slaughter work for his father, preparation for Shabbat. He's the one that's doing the whole Gaviyah campaign. And also, there's there's a Targum, Yonatan ben Uziel, also found in the Midrash Rabbah. Rashi says it as well, that when when the brothers first came in front of Yosef, they thought it was Safnat Pa'aneach. They thought it was this Egyptian Mishnah Lamelech. So they started speaking to each other in Hebrew, and they didn't realize Yosef could understand them. And the pasuk says, "Vehem lo yadeu ki shomea Yosef ki amelitz beinotam." They didn't realize that Yosef could hear them and could understand them because there was a melitz, or as the Targum Yosef ben Uziel translates, the Mitur Geman. There was somebody that was translating. There was a translator in between them. Who was that translator? So says the Targum Yonatan, it was Menashe. Says Rashi, it was Menashe. So Menashe is constantly doing this work. So I actually remember hearing once that that Menashe was really involved in the Olam Hazeh parts, and actually Ephraim had a certain level had a certain Zechut. One of the reasons why we bless our kids to be like Ephraim and Menashe, not Menashe and Ephraim, because he wasn't doing all of that that physical labor, that royal work for his father. He was able to sit and learn Torah and become a Talmid Chacham. So I looked it up. I found it in the Kitav Sofer. So says the Kitav Sofer, Menashe was the Bechor. So because it was the Bechor, Yosef had him as his right-hand man, help him with all those royal duties, but Ephraim could sit, learn Torah, become a Talmid Chacham. Says the Kitav Sofer. But he says that's why Yaakov crossed his hands and placed the right hand on the more ruchani, on the more spiritual Ephraim, because he's making a statement to Yosef that Ephraim, who learns day and night, that should really be the Ikar. You shouldn't underestimate that and giving all the Bechor work to Menashe. But Lanut Dati, I was thinking, maybe Yosef is coming from a very different perspective. He was always trying to change the Chol into the Kodesh. He's keeping Shabbat in Mitzrayim. He's going to make the Egyptians do Brit Milah, as we spoke about in the past. He doesn't live in Goshen, the Jewish enclave that Yehuda sets up, but rather he's in the capital city in Egyptian. Yosef is known as the Mishneh Lemelech. He is the number 2 to the king. Menashe is tied to this concept of the Malchut, and therefore he's trying to expand the Malchut. We're talking about the kingship of Hashem expanding. It's Menashe's job to try to make that Tosefet, to try to expand the Malchut. Just like we said in the messianic era, Yomot Mashiach, the Malchut will expand. But at the same time, we have ourselves Menashe, Otiot Mishnah, the work of the 6 days, the 6 starim. It's also the Otiot, we said last week, of the Neshama, the holy part. He's trying to make it Kadosh. It's Moshe Rabbeinu, the name Moshe with the Nun added to it. Menashe with the Nun. Neshama, it's the Sha'ar Nun, it's the extra bit being added to it to make it to that last level of Olam Haba. So not like what the Kitav Sofer is saying. Afuch, Menashe is able to tap into a level of spirituality that the normal person in this world, this Sha'ar Nun, the Menashe with the Nun, a normal person isn't reaching in this world. In a normal person in this world, you have the Yomot HaChol and you have Shabbat. You have the Mekomot of Chol and the Mekomot of Kodesh. Some way from this part of Yosef that goes into Menashe, it's about expanding that holiness, trying to get that last bit more, trying to get some more Eretz Yisrael, some more Zman, some more Torah. It's a hint to Yomot HaMashiach. Therefore, it's also Otiyot Shmone, Menashe, Neshama, Mishnah. It's also the same letters as Shmona. It's the letters 8. And we know 8 is corresponds to Lamala Min HaTeva. 7 is nature. 8 is Lamala Min HaTeva. Menashe is Lamala Min HaTeva. It's the earlier Yosef roots in the Hanukkah miracle. We have it over here with Menashe, able to expand even more. And that's why it's Ephraim who's bringing the Korban on Shabbat, day 7, but it's Menashe, he's bringing it the next day. He's bringing it on day 8. He worked so hard for 6 days to prepare. Now we have Shabbat, and now he not only did he bring Tosefet Shabbat before, he's now trying to extend it into day 8. Let's try to get to a world Shekulo Shabbat. Let's expand Shabbat. Yaminu Smol Tifrotzi. Let's really get that Shabbat out there as well. So to I saw in the Svat Emet on Parshat Vayechi, he also writes, Menashe is Bechinat Geula. He's this level of the future. Sefer Dat Chochma of Yosef Chaim Elboim, he also writes, Menashe is the Tosefet Shabbat. This is what he's all about. He's about expanding. And then if we're going to say he's going to expand the Zman into a expanded Shabbat, so too when it comes to Makom, so too when it comes to land of Eretz Yisrael, he's going to expand those borders past the Yarden. He's going to start going and expanding Eretz Yisrael to the east. Originally, there was a promise to Avram Avinu back in Sefer Bereshit. It said, I'm going to give you this great land, Minahar Mitzrayim ad Hanar Hagadol Nar Perat. We're going to go from the river of Mitzrayim all the way to the Euphrates. This is Yamin Usmol Tifrotzi. This is land that goes far beyond the Jordan River, areas of Edom, Moab, Ammon. It's these lands that are being conquered in our parashiot. It's the same parts of lands that the half of the tribe of Menashe are now acquiring. They are going into these pieces of land because these are the lands of the Yomot HaMashiach. These are the lands of the extended boundary, the Tosefet Gvul, Tosefet Eretz Yisrael, Tosefet Yerushalayim. Menashe is the Mishnah, but Mishnah is also the same letters as Mishneh. He is the number 2, the doubling over. Shabbat is known for doubling over. The Bachor is always the one, he's the Bachor, Bet Kaf Resh, the 222. He's always the one that fulfills his Abba's role even more. That's why Yosef was a Miktzat Av. He's the number 2 to Yaakov. He's the number 2, the Mishnah Lamelech, when he is in Egypt. And it seems like Menashe, his Bachor, is his number 2 right now. But Shabbat, this concept of doubling over, the Lechem Mishneh, is also again this concept of Shabbat. We have 2 chalot on Shabbat. Menashe is the Tosefet Shabbat, the doubling over of Shabbat. Let's go back to Yosef. We said Yosef is the Mishnah Lamelech. He would ride around on the Mirkevet HaMishnah, this double chariot kind of thing. Ayen Sham for the Pirushim on the double chariot. We have ourselves. Yosef was Zochet to the double portion in Eretz Yisrael. He was named the official Bechor when it comes to land. Therefore, he gets 1 portion for Ephraim and 1 portion for Menashe. Even the language of Yosef means Lehosif, Tosefet. It means to add on. The Gemara teaches us that each of the Avot corresponds to a different tefillah that we have every day. Our 3 daily tefillot are 3 Avot. The Kabbalah states that Yosef HaTzadik corresponds to the extra tefillah of Musaf on Shabbat. So this concept of Yosef having a Musaf, and we'd say even further, this is particularly the part of Menashe that can have that Tosefet. I saw in Sefer Hechala the Yosef Tzadika by Rav Shimon Banunu, these cool Sfarim on big Rabbanim. They're handing it out to all the Batei Knesset here in Israel. So he writes over there that it's specifically Shabbat Musaf. He says other Musafs, like Musaf of Rosh Chodesh, he says Rosh Chodesh, that's David HaMelech's Zechut. Shabbat is specially connected to Yosef. Actually, let's read his words inside, because there's a lot of stuff we can take just for keep in the back of our heads. He says, Agav, you should know on the side, Hazor HaKadosh Omer Sherak Tfilat Musaf Shel Shabbat Nidkena Ayedei Yosef HaTzadik. That Yosef is only the Shabbat Musaf. Shar Tfilat Musaf Lo Tikno Yado. He didn't metaken Musaf on the other holidays. Ella Shel Rosh Chodesh Ayedei David HaMelech. David HaMelech is Rosh Chodesh. Shel Pesach, the Pesach Musaf, Al Yedei Avram Avinu. Shel Rosh Hashanah, Al Yedei Yitzchak Avinu. Shel Yom HaKippurim, Al Yedei Moshe Rabbeinu. V'Shel Sukkot, Al Yedei Aaron HaKohen. So you can use that, have that in the back of your mind. Aharon is Sukkot, Moshe is Yom Kippur, and Yitzchak is Rosh Hashanah, and Avraham is Pesach. Okay. But back to us. Shabbat and Tosefet Shabbat is intrinsically connected to Yosef. But Menashe, he also symbolizes this doubling over, and that's the reason why he's getting 2 portions, 1 in Eretz Yisrael proper, and 1 to the east of the Jordan. That's the Tosefet Shabbat in Makom. That's the Tosefet Gvul, that's the Tosefet Eretz Yisrael. That's the Zechut of Menashe. So Moshe, he was makpid, he was angry at Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuben. He gives them musar because they were trying to settle in Chutz La'aretz. They were trying to leave behind the Kedusha, says Moshe Wolfson. But we see now that there's no open argument against Menashe. It seems to be maybe even Moshe even invited Menashe to come. Why? Because he's supposed to settle the land of Chutz La'aretz. Because when he settles that land, it's no longer Chutz La'aretz. Rather, when he settles Chutz La'aretz, he's going to make Tosefet Ha'aretz. Just like his father did Tosefet Shabbat, even in Egypt, even before the Torah was given. The Tosefet Shabbat, that will be Eretz Yisrael in the future. Therefore, Menashe gets the Mishnah, he gets the double portion, because he corresponds to the Shmone, the Lamala Mina Teva, Lamala Mina Zman, Lamala Mina Makom. Says Rav Wolfson, based on the Bnei Yissaschar, that the 8th month on the calendar is Mar Cheshvan. It's a dark and cold month. It's a month where nowadays there are no holidays in that month. But he brings down the Bnei Yissaschar in the future. This month, which corresponds to Menashe, will be the month of the inauguration of the 3rd Beit HaMikdash. So we see over there, Chanukata Mizbeach, if Menashe, the tribe of Menashe, brought the Korban on the 8th day of inauguration in the desert, so according to the Bnei Yissaschar, in the 8th month, Menashe is going to be the one to inaugurate the Beit Shlishi. Says Rav Wolfson, that's why Menashe keeps coming up in our parashiyot. We barely see Menashe in the rest of the Torah, but now he's mentioned in last week's parasha Pinchas, both in Mattot and Masei in our parasha, this our double parasha this week, and next week in parasha Devarim, we find him again. Why now? What's so important about Menashe? And in all these cases, Menashe dealing with his nachala, dealing with his land, because this time period right now, the 3 weeks, we need the chizuk. This time period now, the exact opposite happens. The Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, the walls were broken down, but to make ourselves smaller, to make the Jewish people weaker, to send us off into the galut. But B'ezrat Hashem, if we learn about Menashe, if we learn about the Zechuyot of Menashe, the Koach of Menashe, the Tosefet of Menashe, the changing over of the Chol to the Kodesh, that could be a Zechut to awaken our Geula. And we have to understand that Menashe gets it right. We need a Tosefet Shabbat. We need a Shabbat even in a Chutz La'aretz. We need to expand those borders. Eventually, the whole will become Kodesh. Eventually, things will expand out. So, maybe we can have that beracha of Menashe that in the future the walls will be broken again. But this time they'll be broken, just like the Psukim in Zechariah, by the expansion of Yerushalayim to the world. Shabbat Shalom.